and welcome back. I'm sure you guys had some fun learning in the breakout sessions and looking at the demos in the expo hall. But let me tell you, we have something great in store for you today. Today, I've had some great conversations with a lot of you out in the expo hall. And I must say that the ideas that you guys have shared around how you're going to use our APIs are just mind-boggling. I'm just looking at all the use cases and going, man, this is great. I didn't even think about it, and so many of those have been coming in. This afternoon, I have a very special guest, Tim O'Reilly, who's always been a champion for the open source and Web 2.0 community. In fact, he's the one who invented the concept. He's a visionary and an entrepreneur, and he needs no further introduction to this crowd. So please welcome Tim O'Reilly.
You know, at first I misheard Naveed, and I thought he said I was a missionary. I think I'm that too. I want to just check in with you guys first. I really appreciate you coming back. It's been a long day. How many of you out there in the audience have O'Reilly books? So, guys know who I am. How many of you have been to an O'Reilly event? No. Okay, so some fair number of you. I'm going to try to provide some overall context for you to think about what it means to be a PayPal developer. I'm going to put it in the context of something I've been calling the Internet Operating System. I'm going to start with some current buzzwords, cloud computing. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Web 2.0. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Now, I really believe that the essence of both Web 2.0 and cloud computing is the idea that we are building an Internet operating system. I've actually been making this case for a long time, long before we were calling it Web 2.0. Back in 2002, I actually held a conference called Building the Internet Operating System. And the marketing copy said peer-to-peer web services are only the first steps towards the emergence of a distributed Internet operating system. It was kind of a dubious claim to many people at the time. In fact, even at my own conference, the very first Web 2.0 conference, Bram Cohen of BitTorrent got up there and his talk was making fun of me. He said, an Internet operating system, you've got to be kidding. There's no storage, no scheduling, no processing, no memory management, all the things that make up an operating system as we know it. And of course, now we look at people like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and even things like Google Chrome OS, and people are starting to take seriously the idea that maybe this is starting to look like an operating system. But there's a key concept that I want to get across, and that is that an Internet operating system is not like a PC operating system. It's going to have some very different rules of business. And this is really summed up in a really interesting way in a post by venture capitalist Bill Gurley, where he's talking about Amazon's strategy with AWS. And I've actually heard this directly from Jeff, but it's a great summary of this position. Jeff believes that Amazon will win in cloud computing because he thinks it's a low-margin business. And he said, for us, we're a retailer. Anything is better than our current business. We're used to sort of micro-scale margins. So, but look at our competitors, IBM and Microsoft, and people like this. They can't live in our low-margin world. It's a worse business than any business that they're in. So, if that's what Jeff thinks about, cloud computing as a business opportunity, you go, well, that's a slightly different take on that future. But I'm actually convinced that there is a lot of money to be made in the cloud, and certainly there's a lot of money to be made in applications. But a lot of what I've been talking about in Web 2.0 is summed up in this statement from Clayton Christensen, the author of The Innovator's Dilemma. In 2004, he wrote an article for Harvard Business Review in which he described something he called the law of conservation of attractive profits. And it reads like this: when attractive profits disappear at one stage in the value chain because a product becomes modular and commoditized, the opportunity to earn attractive profits with proprietary products will usually emerge at an adjacent stage. Now, Clay and I connected over this because I'd written a paper in 2003 called The Open Source Paradigm Shift. And it was really an exploration of how I thought the open source community was misunderstanding the impact of Linux and open source on the internet. Everybody was focused on the idea that somehow Linux was going to displace Microsoft, that OpenOffice was going to displace Microsoft Office. And I said, no, no, no. The lessons are all back there in the early 80s in what happened with the IBM personal computer. What happened in 1981 was that IBM released the specifications for a computer that anybody could build out of off-the-shelf parts. There were a couple of completely unintended consequences. First of all, it completely opened up the hardware market, where people like Michael Dell could start a company in a dorm room. But it took all the margin out of computer hardware. And the margin didn't disappear, and this is Clay's point. The margin went somewhere else. It went to software. And because Microsoft understood that, they were able to build this huge empire. So my conclusion was that the real lesson of free software, open source software, and the open standards of the internet was that value was going to migrate, particularly not just value, but attractive profits. You know, the big margin stuff that you see that IBM used to have in the 60s and 70s and that Microsoft had through the 80s and the 90s was going to be somewhere else. And eventually I came to call that somewhere else Web 2.0. And so this is the heart of the idea behind the Internet Operating System. You know, I keep using the word, but I don't think people understand quite yet what I meant by it. And it's really important that it has to do with this migration of not just attractive profits, but also of power to a different class of service. And I'm going to try to explain that to you. The Internet Operating System is a data-oriented operating system. Its subsystems are databases of people, places, things, prices, documents, images, sounds, relationships, trust metrics, and then services that help people use them, like search, payment, matching, and recognition. So if you think about eBay, for example, it's not just a database of products, it's also a database of the people who buy and sell those products. If you think about PayPal, it's not just a database of people, it's also a database of banks. It's a database of trust metrics and so on. And these databases have this unique characteristic on the internet that they get better the more people use them. And that's the heart of their magic. And so keep that in mind. And so let me take the rest of this and frame it with what I would call the O'Reilly radar methodology. It's summed up in this wonderful quote from science fiction writer William Gibson. He said, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet." So what we do at O'Reilly, whether it's coming up with books to publish or conference topics or ideas to evangelize, is that we watch people who you might call alpha geeks, actually people like you. And we say, what are they doing that the rest of the industry hasn't caught on to? What are the implications? What is the future that they are living in? So, for example, back in 1992, when we first discovered the World Wide Web, there were only a couple hundred websites. But we said, this is the future. Some people are already living in it. And we went out there and tried to evangelize it. And then we look for trend data that tells us that a particular future is becoming mainstream. So I'm going to give you a vision of the future and where I think this Internet Operating System thing is going in the form of a series of technology anecdotes, things that we can see from startups or projects around us, and then try to draw some conclusions from those that will tell us something about the shape of the future that might help to inform how you think about the applications you build. So, first story. This is an application that you may or may not have tried, the Google mobile app. Now, if you haven't tried the application, its speech-activated search is one of the features.